Happy day. This is Dr. Preetha from the Department of Electronic Media. The session for today, which I'm going to deal, is about properties of sound and envelope of sound. So let's go on to the first presentation about properties of sound. Sound is very important in audio production when it comes to filmmaking or short film production, let it be documentary production. Sound engages audience and it creates a kind of emotional responses. So before we integrate audio in media, one must know about what is a characteristic of sound wave. So this entire chapter deals about the technical properties of how sound wave is dealt and what are its main properties. So there are four important properties in the sound wave. So one is the wavelength, the second is the frequency and pitch, the third is the amplitude, and fourth is the timbre. So these four are very important when it comes to recording, mixing, and mastering of sound. Now let's move on to what is wavelength. Now wavelength is nothing but, it is referred to as the size of the wave. So you can see in this picture, there is wave which is moving up and down. So the distance between this is referred to as the wavelength of the sound wave. So when the midpoint refers to as how the phase starts and what is the midpoint of the phase. So this is referred to as the wavelength. This is one of the important property of the sound wave, because based on this only we'll be dealing about what is an amplitude, or let it be what is frequency, pitch, timbre. The next important property of sound wave is called as amplitude. So amplitude has different terms. We refer them as either loudness of sound, or sometimes we even call it as the intensity of the sound. So when we tell a sound is very high or very low, the term immediately mentioned as amplitude. So in a sound wave, you can see the midpoint of the wave, which is marked in red color, where the height of the wave is measured. So this is referred to as the amplitude. So wavelength is said to be the size of the wave and amplitude is said to be the height of the wave. So the height is always referred to as the crest and the down portion of the wave is referred to as the trough. So when it comes to the measurement of amplitude, it is always measured in unit wise called as decibels, which is indicated by dB. So this is the measurement of amplitude. When it comes to frequency, it is called as hertz. So here the human hearing capacity always have a decibel range of hearing between 0 decibels to 120 decibels. So anything we tell which is beyond 125 decibels is something which we call it as hearing of pain. So there are two terms. One is called as the threshold of pain and one is called as the threshold of hearing. The meaning of threshold is the point where it exactly starts. So generally when we call in a log scale, it starts from 0 decibels to 125 decibels. So anything which a human hears beyond 125 decibels is something which it's going to affect the hearing capacity of the individual. So the fixing hearing level for a human ear capacity is between 0 to 120 decibels. So 0 is said to be its starting level, which is said to be the threshold of hearing, and beyond 135 is said to be the threshold of pain. So for instance, these are the examples for the typical sound levels. You can see the jet aircraft taking, so it is 125. So something beyond this is going to affect or damage the ear. A rock concert. Rock concerts are typically where we have heavy metals being used, so it will be around 120 decibels. Frequent hearing between the range of 125 to 120 to 125 is definitely going to damage your ear. The next is heavy traffic during peak hours also. It can be around 90 decibels. And a normal conversation. Now this depends also on the room dimension. If it is a small room, it differs, and when it comes to a large room or an auditorium, the decibel range can differ. So I have mentioned the example with a normal conversation in a classroom. So it can go up to 60 decibels, and then a proper recording broadcast studio can be around 20 decibels, which is mandatory, where they have to fix up to this level. So these are the levels from the basic till the end. So beyond 125 or 135 is something which is going to hurt the ear. So we move on to the next property, which is called as the frequency. Now, frequency, you can see the number of waves produced in 1 second is referred to as frequency. So there is, the first portion of the wave is referred to as low. Frequency is very important when it comes to mastering, recording and mixing sound, because we deal with low, high and mid-range frequency levels. So the low range, here we see they have spread. There is a space between one wave to another. So we generally call them as a longer wavelength. Okay, so the longer the wavelength means it is of low frequency level. And when you have shorter wavelength, when they are attached nearby, it's called as a shorter wavelength, that is referred to as the high frequency. So frequency is also determined by the pitch. So amplitude, like how we call amplitude with loudness or intensity of sound, frequency also is determined by the pitch of the sound. So we tell high waves indicate high pitch sound, then the low wave indicate low pitch sound. So all this, then sometimes it also falls at the midpoint where we call as a mid-range frequency level. So this is very important when it comes to post-production part. And like how we have for amplitude, like that we also have a term called for measuring sound for frequency, which is called as hertz. So like there in amplitude, we deal between 0 to 135 decibels at the maximum. So here in frequency, we deal with hertz, where the human hearing capacity will be between 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz. So anything which is audible range below 20 hertz is referred to as infrasound. So anything which is above 20,000 hertz is referred to as ultrasound. So when it comes to animal hearing, we always refer elephants, they come under this category called as an infrasound. We tell that elephants have big ears. So what does it mean? It generally, they mention about the hearing capacity of it. So that is why even when earthquakes or any mild, anything like thunderstorms or rain is about to come, they'll be very easy to identify what the sound is about. So even frequency which is below 20 hertz is referred to as infrasound. And when we look at bats, they generally they have a process which is called as the echolocation. Echolocation is they know anything which is around 2 meters away from them. They locate it only through the sound. So they are very keenly they can observe sound which is above 20,000 hertz. So above 20,000 is referred to as ultrasound, and anything below 20 hertz is said to be the infrasound. So this is, when it comes to perception of sound, it's nothing but how we deal with sound when it comes to animal hearing and human hearing. So human hearing generally have the capacity between 20 to 20,000 hertz. The next important sound quality is timbre. We pronounce it as timbre. T-I-M is mentioned, but we call it as timbre. So timbre is nothing but there will be two sounds having equal amplitude and frequency. So far we saw what is frequency, what is amplitude. So timbre refers, like for instance, when two people speak, we immediately identify which is your friend's voice and which is your close relative's voice. Will be very it will be very easy for us to pick up. So identifying that tone of sound or the quality of sound is referred to as timbre. There are two kinds of timbre. One is the instrumental timbre and vocal timbre. When somebody is singing, you immediately tell that this voice belongs to that singer. It's a male singer or a female singer. So you identify by gender. You pick up by the age group. You tell it's a kid's voice, it's an adult voice, it's an old man's voice. So we identify these categories under vocal timbre. So vocal timbre is something got with the speech. You immediately identify who is speaking and what they are speaking. So the tonal quality of both frequency and amplitude will be the same, but we'll be able to distinguish what the sound is about. Then we have the instrumental timbre. When we listen to music, we immediately identify whether it's going to be the string instrument, whether it's going to be a guitar or a violin, or it's going to be a tambura, or it's going to be a piano, a Casio, or it's going to be drums. You identify in the music itself what the instrument. So that is referred to as the instrumental timbre. So the only difference is frequency and amplitude will be the same, but you will be able to identify what the tonal quality is about the sound. So this is one of the important properties of sound wave. So along with this, we also need to know about the envelope of sound. This is very important when it comes to mastering and mixing of sound. Now, so far we saw what is a wavelength, what is amplitude, what is frequency, what is timbre. So here, when I talk about envelope of sound, we talk how the level of sound maintains in that particular stage. So let it be when it's going to be a dialogue or a voiceover, or when you're recording any BGM, we need to know how long that sound sustains or it is there. So the only component or the property which is dealt in envelope of sound is said to be the amplitude of sound. So amplitude is nothing but, like, there are four important categories. If you see here in this picture, there are four important categories in envelope of sound. We call it as the ADSR stage. It is nothing but the attack, decay, sustain, and the release stage. So the y-axis indicates amplitude, and the x-axis indicates the time of how the sound wave has been traveling. So where attack is a portion where when the sound starts and reaches at its peak. So you can see the peak point of the graph where it reaches. So this is again got to, the amplitude has reached to its maximum level, and then slowly it has to fall down. So that phase is called as the decay phase. And once it comes down, that sound has to be retained for some level. Okay, that is called as the sustain level. And then the fade out portion is said to be the release. So amplitude is the only property we deal with ADSR. Now why this stage is being explained in properties of sound is, this is very important when it comes to mixing of sound. So the attack portion is the portion in the sound envelope where it represents where the time taken to the peak. So you tell that the time for the amplitude to reach at that level is generally, so the build-up sound is generally referred to as attack. Now decay is a portion where when it slowly comes down. Okay, so you can't fade out. So decay is a time which slowly comes down in the amplitude after a period of time. That is like in seconds it comes. So after the peak, it has to fall down at some level. So the third portion is referred to as the sustain. Now sustain is the period of time of how the sound is being sustained for some time. That's why the term called as sustain is referred. So before it gets fade out, the sound will remain there for some time. So that portion is generally referred to this. And the last phase of how the sound is moving out is said to be the release. So release is a complete fade out of sound. So after this, there is no sound available. So this is like, so overall all the four aspects in the envelope of sound, that is the ADSR, attack, decay, sustain, and release. So how it changes with the traveling of sound wave over a period of time with the reference to the amplitude level taken into account. So hope you have understood what the session was dealt about. So a quick recap of what we have seen is, we saw about the properties of sound. So what are the characteristics of sound wave? So the four properties or characteristics of the sound wave are generally called as what is a wavelength used for, and what do you need to know in a wavelength, what is timbre referred to, what do you mean by frequency, what is amplitude, then what are the two important kinds of measurement which we use. When it comes for amplitude, we measure it by decibels. When it comes to frequency, we measure it by hertz. Then how is a human hearing system differed from the animal hearing? And then we saw about the last phase, which is called as the envelope of sound, or we called as the ADSR stage, called as the attack, decay, sustain, and release. So hope you understood. We'll move on to the next session on the different types of other properties which we refer generally called as the reverberation and the echo. Thank you.